What is up, my Slifer Slackers? Mr. Slifer for the win here, bringing out a brand new video of my deck list for MLB that got 8th place at Houston's Vanguard Regional Tournament. So I've seen and heard some commentary about my deck and asking about how I built this deck and why I built it the way it did. To get things out of the way right now, I built the deck to be a rush deck. So you'll see most of these cards that are a lot of people wouldn't use in the first place. That was my other philosophy around it. I wanted to make a deck that wasn't necessarily meta, but a collection of cards that I personally liked that worked together really well, in my opinion. So that's what I went through when I built this deck in the first place. Let's get into the deck list. So for my grade 3s, I am running 4 copies of Majesty Lord Blaster. Majesty Lord Blaster's ability is on swing. You can move either a Blaster Blade or a Blaster Dart to the soul. In doing so, if you move a Blaster Blade to the soul, you get to retire an opponent's rear guard. If you move Blaster Dart to the soul, you get triple drive for the turn. If you have both of them in the soul, your Vanguard gets 2,000 power and +1 critical, so long as they have both in the soul. So you're swinging for 15,000 power or 23 if you have a booster. And that's why I run him. He works great. He won me a whole lot of the games at the tournament, obviously. He helps out against decks like Flagship or Flagberg. I forget the name of the card at the moment. Mainly decks that cannot power up past 15,000 or need boosters for that. So I run 4 copies of MLB for the Persona Ride. Yeah. Then my next grade 3, I'm running 2 copies of the Order. I know a lot of people would probably be saying I should run 4 of, just so I can get the blasters more consistently. I personally see my blasters pretty consistently. Plus, I tried as much as I probably shouldn't. I actually do not focus as much as I should on the blaster skill. Like, yes, I focus on the triple drive skill every turn, but like, it's not a huge detrimental thing if I don't get triple drive for 1 turn. But yeah, so the order is Cannon Blast 1. If you have a Vanguard Blaster in its card name, you get to search your deck for up to 1 other grade 2 blaster from your deck and add it to your hand. As for the grade 2s, I am running the man, the myth, the legend, my avatar for the past 10 years, Blaster Blade. Blaster Blade's D-era ability now is, on place of the Vanguard, you can Cannon Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, and retire it. Now, if you have him on rear guard, you can Cannon Blast 1 and choose a grade 2 or greater unit to retire. Now, what I realized about the on rear guard skill is that it doesn't specify front row. So that means if your opponent has something in like the back row, you can retire a grade 2 or higher from the back row that they're trying to keep safe. And that is just nuts to me. But yep, Blaster Blade here. I always wanted to get Blaster Blade to the top 8 or just tops in general. And I'm so happy I finally did it. Blaster Blade, thank you for always being here for me, man. Cannot have done it without you. The next grade 2 I have is 4 copies of Blaster Dark, my other avatar. Blaster Dark is here to get MLB obviously to 2,000 to 15,000 power, as well as the triple drive. His Vanguard and rear guard skill is on place. Cannon Blast 1, choose one of your own units and retire it, and then choose one of your opponent's units and retire it. On place of Vanguard, you can retire one of your own rear guards, and then he gains twin drive for the turn. But I don't personally use that. I always stay on Blaster Blade. Didn't know if I mentioned Blaster Blade's also ability is if you don't retire a unit, you can also draw a card. Anyway, my next grade 2 slot goes 3 copies of Knight of Loyalty Bedivere. Bedivere is here to get K out. You'll see him in a moment. What I noticed in this deck is that it did not have a good attack capabilities. Like, most of my attacks would be 18, 15 to 21 to 18 again. So Bedivere is here to swing for 23 with K. That's mainly what he's here for. And I wanted to use old units that I personally loved. That was the main focus of this deck, to use cards that I personally loved from the franchise and what I personally just like. Now this one, someone said it was some controversial as to why I'm running it, but I am running 2 copies of Sterilized Angel. What she does is, on swing, if you have no face-up cards in the damage zone, she gains 5,000 power. So she's already a 15k by herself, or 23 with a booster. So what I'll notice is I'll have her like right here, and say I'll have a blaster right here. So that means I can move this blaster to the soul, and she can still attack and hit to the Vanguard. That was the main thing I was trying to go for, as well as good rush capability, especially on my grade 2 turn if I have her in my hand. I can retire with Blast Blade, get a Counter Blast out, and swing for 15 here. As for the grade 1, I saw WCC's video about this, and he was very confused as to why I am running 4 copies of Little Sage Marin. So Marin's skill for the ride deck is on place of Vanguard, or when you're grade 2, when this unit is rode upon by a grade 2 blaster, I can search my deck, I can look at the top 10 cards of my deck for a blaster and add it to my hand. If I whiff the blaster search, I can move Wingle Brave to the back row. His rearguard ability, though, is that on rearguard, if I had 3 or more units, himself included, then he gains 2,000 power, which works for both the rush capability as well as boosting capabilities. So what I'll mainly do is I'll try having him here, or if he's a good booster for the Vanguard. With MLB and Marin, my Vanguard is swinging for 25k practically every turn, with triple drive if I get Blasted Dark out on the board. Now that, in my opinion, is scary to guard against, and was very scary against my opponents, which is why I got to the top 8 in the first place. I noticed that a lot of people hated whenever I had Marin back here, and were like, oh god, I got a guard. And they would actually overguard from time to time. The other thing is, Marin's a great attacker because, say, people will retire my grade 2s. Alright, sure. Still 18k with my Marin and a booster. So yeah, that's why Marin's here. He's great for boosting. I love Marin. He's also been one of my main graded ones for the past 10 years. So I could not say no to running 4 of him. My next grade 1 is 3 copies of Knight of Friendship K. He is here to boost Bedivere and give Bedivere 5,000 power for that 23 columns. So that's why K is here. You can't have Bedivere without K. Then my next grade 1 is one that WCC also was very confused about, and that is 3 copies of Fort from the Bastion ride line. The only relevant skill is giving my Vanguard a 5,000 power boost with a Counter Blast. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be thinking, like, that's stupid. Why would you waste a Counter Blast to give your Vanguard 5,000 power? Well, let me tell you. I will usually have Fort here. My setup would usually be this. Would usually be Fort here, an Angel here, and Blasted Dark here. And some rear guards right here. Let's just say Bedivere and K. So what I'll do is I will use a Counter Blast to flip over to give 5,000 power to MLB, attack with MLB, move Blasted Dark into the Soul so he can be at 20,000 power. That way I still have 2 good attackers here, and my Vanguard is swinging for 20,000 power, which means my opponent will have to guard slightly more. Yes, it's not foolproof, but it's what helped me win in the tournament, or at least get to the top 8 in the first place. So that was my little philosophy on Fort. That's why I was running Fort in the first place. And if anyone else has any questions about it, that's really all there is to it. Fort is there to give you better numbers. Heck, if I have Marin and MLB together, my MLB is swinging for 30, which even makes it even more of a reason to guard higher. So that's why Fort is here. Fort is here to give my Vanguard power, as well as give me good more rush capabilities. My last grade 1 is going to be 4 copies of the Keter PG, where if you have 1 card in your hand, you don't have to discard anything. There's not much else to say about the PG. Then my trigger lineup, I am running, well, grade 0 wise, I am running Wingle Brave as a starter, because you can't have blasters without Wingle Brave. You couldn't use Marin skill without Wingle Brave, so that's why he's here. I love my doggo. Then, as for my trigger lineup, I am running the Overtrigger for the Keter Sanctuary Overtrigger for more drive checks. That's really all there is to say about it. As for my trigger lineup, I am running 8 criticals because I like giving more pressure to my opponent and killing my opponent a lot faster. This is actually how I killed my opponent who's using Pure Light at grade 2. They didn't even get to grade 3. They went from 2 to 6 in 1 turn. And man, was that guy upset. My next trigger lineup was 3 draws, which I know a lot of people are going to be saying, why are you running draw triggers if you're going to get triple drive? You're going to just deck out a lot faster. This is just in case I do whiff on the blaster skill and I don't see my orders. I could potentially draw into them with my draw triggers. And personally, having an extra draw, especially if you're like at 4 or 5 damage, No, if you're at 4 damage and you go into 5, a draw trigger is always the best thing, in my opinion, to see because it gets you an extra card to guard against your opponents. And then last 4 cards are going to be my 4 heals because, of course, you're going to need 4 heals in the deck. But yeah, that is my MLB deck. I love the deck. I'm so grateful to it for getting me to top 8 and at regionals. I couldn't have done it without them. If you guys want to know more, let me tell you at least some of the strategies and some of the matchups I even had against in this tournament. Alright, so as to the strategies and some of the decks I played against and how my matches went, my main strategy, like I said, is to rush my opponent down. So if I go second, and if I have the capability to rush, I will rush, because I need to get my opponent to at least 4 damage as soon as possible so that they can drop more cards to guard. And it's also a little bit of a mind game in my opinion. So what I'll notice is if I rush, that usually makes my opponent actually rush back to try to get me to lose more cards, or they don't rush and they just keep guarding everything as fast as they can, which again makes them lose more cards to use on their own. So it's a bit of a mind game thing I noticed for me, and the way a friend of mine quoted it is that I don't rush without thinking it through. I'm an organized rush, being that I know when to rush and what to hold on to for when I need it. Like, I won't go into it willy-nilly. The other thing is that I changed my strategy on a flip of a dime. For instance, in my second round against Flagship, I forget the name of the deck at the moment, but I kept them at 3 damage the majority of the fight, because once I gave him Cannon Blast, I was going to die. I didn't have many cards in my hand at the moment, and I could only guard with what I could, which wasn't much to say. So, because of that, I kept him at 3 damage, retired his rear guards as much as I could because he kept guarding Majesty Lord in case of a straight critical killed him, which was very likely the case. And hilariously enough, that actually was the case and how he lost. He no-guarded my Vanguard, and he got hit by my drive check consisted of a critical and a heal, which killed him. And he also almost decked out too because he was using the order that revived a unit from the drop zone, and he kept reviving the grade 3 that was restricted Magnolia to let him draw a card. And that just kept making him draw until the point where he almost decked out. Luckily, he drew his Overtrigger too, so I was pretty much set for the entire fight. My first round, I lost to Bruce. It wasn't a good first round for me, so to speak. I went second, which already sucks enough against Bruce. And I just couldn't really keep up as much as I would like to have. Like I said, in round 2, I fought Flagship. Flagberg beat that, luckily. Round 3, I went up against a Pure Light player who didn't even get the Pure Light. He died at grade 2 because I swung with MLB, hit critical, draw when my Vanguard had a critical. So we went from 2 to 5, and for whatever reason, he couldn't guard Blast of Dark, who was hitting for 435, even though he had like 5-6 cards in hand. So I guess he must have had a really bad hand. So that happened. My fourth round was against another Pure Light player who actually did get the Pure Light, but I've practiced against Pure Light so many times that I kind of know its capabilities and how to actually fight against it in the first place. For instance, if y'all don't already know, to fight Pure Light, you're supposed to consider a prison as a second hand. Like, if instead of giving them things that you're like, ugh, why do I gotta give them this? Give them things that you'll know you're gonna want back on your board anyway, which is what I did. For instance, I set myself up for getting Bedivere and K out to the board by giving them a Bedivere before I went to grade 3, using the skill to get Bedivere back to call out a K. So I got 2 extra units for the price of 1. Or technically for a price of 3. I got 3 units for a price of 1 because you get 2 units since they had 2 cards in their order in their prison zone, and then I got K from the deck. Heck, the other thing I did was, because of Pure Light, I would personally give them a Blast of Dark so that I can get triple drive more times than I usually would. And the main strategy against prison that I used was I called the critical for Keter to move the soul to get 2,000 power to unit. Now the 2,000 power didn't really matter, but the fact that I got an extra soul is what I was aiming for. So whenever they went to Pure Light, I would just give them 2 cards from the soul, and I would still keep Blast Blade and Blast of Dark. Now, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, 15,000 power doesn't really matter against plus 20 to the board or something, but what matters to it is that during my turn, I can still hit for my main Vanguard's capabilities. And then I won. I hit the overtrigger actually in the first couple turns and hit a critical as well. So, but that he had 2 PGs ready to go. But because of that, he was on a back burner for the majority of that fight afterwards because he already whiffed the 2 PGs, and I was able to just stay in control for the majority of the fight. Now, for my 5th round, I fought against a friend of mine who was using Eva. It was my first couple times fighting Eva. I haven't really ran into the deck that often, so I didn't know how to actually fight against it. I guarded as much as I could, but I lost due to him hitting the overtrigger while I was at 5 damage, and I didn't have a PG. Like, I had only 1 PG, so I could stop his Vanguard attack, but I couldn't stop his rear guard. So even if I did, for whatever PG his Vanguard, I couldn't stop his rear guard even if I wanted to, unfortunately. So, wasn't upset. I knew that the overtrigger was going to happen eventually, and I'm set. I feel bad for him. He actually bubbled out in 9th place, and I got into top 8. But he did really good for a majority of his fights. I'm so glad of how he did. I heard he got to top 8 in V the next day, so proud of you. If you're watching, thank you. Anyway, my 6th round opponent was an Orphis player, which, again, my first time playing against the new Orphis. I think it's Orphis Regius, if I'm pronouncing this correctly. It's my first time playing against that Orphis build. I won as well. It wasn't even... I won because I hit a double heal, so I went from 5 to 3 because he was at 3 the entire fight too, and that got me to the point where I can just take 2 attacks and then swing and kill him the next turn, which is what happened. My final round, until I broke to the top 8, was against a Lyrical Monastery player who was using Kyrie, and he got to the grade 4, but the thing was, if you're watching, dude, I am so sorry for what happened. You really did speak it into existence, so, like, he had mentioned that he had gotten hit by overtrigger all day for D, and I'm like, I feel like I'm gonna hit the overtrigger now, because since he said that, and sure enough, he guarded with his overtrigger because he drew into it, and I had hit mine to pass, and the first drive check I get is, of course, the overtrigger. So because of that, it broke through his guard, and he went from, I think, 1 to 4, and then he was barely able to guard against my other attacks, which he did manage to guard, but because of Kyrie, who needs to actually call cards to the board, or send him back to even actually use its ability, he was pretty much on the backbone of the entire fight. Like, he could barely guard, and he could barely call cards to be much of a threat to me. So much so that I was at least at 2 to 3 damage the majority of the fight, and by the end of it, I had just steamrolled him. If you're watching again, I'm sorry for that, man. Hope you're doing good. And as for the actual announcements to get in top 8, I was so surprised because this is my first time in, like, playing Vanguard that I ever broke to the top 8 at regionals. So needless to say, I was really happy. But of course, I got pitted up against the undefeated Nirvana player. And not went as well as you would think. I got steamrolled. I went first, but he had I think it's Ashley. He had Ashley that lets him ride into the grade 4 Nirvana, and I got double critted from 2 to 5, and I went from 2 damage to 5 damage in the span of 1 turn. Wow, sounds familiar. Looks like I deserved that from the Pure Light player. Huh. But yeah, no, I didn't know whether I could do anything differently. If I could have done one thing differently, it didn't really matter. At one point, he was swinging for 33, and I had a critical, Bedivere, and a heal in my hand. Now, I could have used both the critical and the heal to guard, and call Bedivere the next turn to call a K, because I still had 2 or 3 Ks in the deck still. So I could at least get another booster and attack with that. But I'm like thinking, no, I need to be able to guard the next attack. But like, I don't know why I thought that mattered, because he had Esperidia, Nirvana, and I think he had Expectra, or he had Arcs on the board. I think it was Arcs. So like, the fun thing I didn't know about Esperidia is that you don't have to be in overdrive state to get the restand off. You can actually just do that. The only difference is that he won't gain power, obviously. So I didn't actually know that. That's what I knew I learned over the weekend. But yeah, I don't know why I didn't just guard with both the critical and the heal, because I could have just called Bedivere and called K, which would have shuffled my deck, But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really matter. I lost the next turn anyway. I did hit jack shit in my dry checks, actually. I think I hit 2 normal units, which wasn't going to help me, and my damage check was a critical. But, hey, whatever, it happens, so I wasn't too upset. I've kind of gotten to the point where I can lose with dignity, so. But I'm glad that he won. I'm proud of all of us from the Austin community who got the top 8. We really dominated this year. But more so, I'm really happy that I finally got this guy at the top 8. But yeah, that's basically what happened at regionals. Hope this clarified some of the stuff that happened or about what my deck was in the first place. Thank you so much for checking out this video if you did, and hope you all take care. Until next time, stay slacking.